All right, so at this point, we have looked at motion graphs, and you guys have learned how to interpret information from that graph as well as figure out what type of motion is happening just by the look of the graph and looking at what is plotted along the y axis. We've looked at vectors and we will be revisiting vectors as we go through this unit. But the big thing that we have to get through is something called the kinematic formulas. And so what this video is going to be about is what the formula is, and we're going to look at the variables that you will be either given or having to find. And out of these variables, there's 5 of them here. Before I tell you what they are, there's just 5 of them, and you will have 4. 3 that you're given, 1 that you're trying to find, and then the 5th one will kind of help you figure out which formula that you're going to use. Now, something a little different is we are going to name our formulas. All right. And so the first formula that we're going to look at is called Ella. And so to kind of help, because, typically with the speed and velocity and acceleration, you guys are like, oh, I'm going to use the speed formula. I'm going to use the velocity formula. Well, these are all kinematic formulas. So if we give them a name, it kind of helps them stand out from each other. So the first formula is called Ella. And Ella, in the standard form, if you will, is written this way: VF, which is final velocity, equals VI, initial velocity, plus acceleration times time. Okay? And so if I look at what I am given, meters per second, hopefully at this point we all recognize that meters per second is a unit for velocity, so VI. Okay. If we look at the second one, meters per second, is also a unit for velocity. And guess what? We have VF, the final velocity. All right, M is distance or height. And we do not have a D in this formula, so we're going to skip over that. A is acceleration. And remember, that's meters per second squared. So we have that. So I'm going to put an A there. And then T is time, and that unit is seconds. So here we go. So these are the variables that we are given. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade yellow the one that I'm not given. Okay? So that is our first formula, Ella. So final velocity equals initial velocity plus acceleration times time. Our second formula, we're going to call her Maddie. Okay, so Maddie, to calculate Maddie, or Maddie, D, distance equals 1/2 final velocity plus initial velocity times time. Okay, and so let's look at the things that I'm given. I look and I see that I have VI. I also have VF. So I'm going to write that in my table as well. I have distance, which is in meters. So I have distance, and we're going to make that pink. All right. I do not have acceleration, but I have T for time. So I'm going to label all of these. Acceleration, I am not given. So once again, I'm going to shade that in. All right, so that's the second formula. That is Maddie. All right, the third formula that we have, we're going to call Uche. Okay. And that formula is distance equals initial velocity times time plus 1/2 acceleration times time squared. You should be familiar with this a little bit, because when we spend a little time looking at free fall, because initial velocity was 0, we took that out. Okay, we took this part out. And to find the distance, it was 1/2 acceleration times time squared. So that this formula should be a little familiar. You should be a little familiar with that. All right, so let's look and see what we are given. All right, I have VI, which is initial velocity. I have distance. I also have acceleration, and I have time. So those are the variables that I'm given, and these are the units that these variables will be in. So when you're reading the problem, these are the units that you'll see. Final velocity, I'm not given, and I'm not using, so I shade that in. All right. And then our last formula is Carlos. Okay. So Carlos is final velocity squared equals initial velocity squared plus 2 acceleration times distance. All right. So if I look here, I have initial velocity. So I have VI. I also have final velocity. So I have VF. I have distance. So I am given that unit. And I have acceleration. What I am not given is time. Okay, so that's the variable I'm not given, and I'm going to shade that in. All right, and so there we have it. Those are our 4 formulas. We have Ella, Maddie, Uche, and Carlos. And what we're going to do at this point, we're going to learn how to, we're going to go from our problem, figuring out which formula out of these 4, Ella, Maddie, Uche, and Carlos, which 4 we need to use, and then figure out how to solve the problem. But before I leave you, the last little thing I want to do is just go through and just go through my variables. And so make sure we understand, like if you see VI, that stands for initial velocity. VF is final velocity. Okay. D is going to be distance or height. Okay, that could be height in the problem. All right. A is acceleration. And of course, T is time. And then, of course, let me put this here. The little shaded part represents that this variable is not given. All right, so let's make sure we get this in our notebooks. Okay, and then from there we can practice. So remember, we're going to learn how to recognize based on what we're given and what we're trying to find, which formula we need to use. And it will be one of our 4 that we have here, Ella, Maddie, Uche, or Carlos. All right, so let's get started.